All right, hello culinary. Today we're doing the chai scone with a maple glaze. Basically, I'll just tell you right now, with a scone, you're gonna look at your flavors, something like, in this, for instance, we have a chai spice blend, and then we have the maple and chai in the glaze. You can interchange those. When my mom had her bakery, we would do plenty of interchangeable spices and fruits. So in the summer, we might have a strawberry scone with a lemonade glaze on top. In the winter, we might do something like chai, we might do an apple, tons of things to choose from. But you just have to have kind of a base recipe. Know that you can change your spices, your fruit mixture, your glaze to match kind of whatever season or whatever vibe we're going for here. The absolute must-do on scones, biscuits, pie crusts, anything where you want sort of a flaky texture, you absolutely need cold cream and cold butter. So we're going to talk about that right now. To get that really flaky texture, you need those things to keep basically their form until the last second when they're baked in. If not, you get kind of that mushy pie crust. When you have that mushy pie crust, it's just not that flaky, beautiful texture. Same thing with scones. If you've ever had a scone that's more chewy rather than kind of that like flaky scone texture that you're looking for, they probably didn't use cold butter. So right here I have 12 tablespoons of butter, which is just a stick and a half of butter if you're using kind of our normal kitchen measurements. Here I'm going to cut it lengthwise in half. This is just kind of the quickest way that I know how to do butter. We're going to cut it in each, so the whole stick, we want it into 24 cubes. We're trying our best not to touch our butter too much, because the more we touch it, the more the heat from our hands break down that butter, make it nice, hot, and oily, which for some things is great. For this particular recipe, we do not want that. We want cold, have I mentioned cold butter, okay? So I'm just cutting these down into small, manageable cubes. So I'll do 24 for my whole stick of butter, and then 12 cubes for my half stick of butter there. This. And then one more. And again, careful, really just try not to touch your butter as much as possible. Unfortunately, as I did my other demo, my butter set out. I should have kept it in the fridge. That was just an accident in my part when I was setting everything out. So this is pretty soft, so I need to leave it in the freezer for a little bit longer. So I have these cubes of butter here. Just like this. So now that we have our little cubes of butter, like these will go into the freezer in a second. First, I'm going to show you what else has to go into the freezer, which is our heavy cream. We have a half a cup of heavy cream here in our liquid measuring cup. I'm going to put one whole egg. I just cracked a whole egg in here like this. Then we need one egg yolk in here as well. There's a couple ways to do this. First way, you can take your egg, crack it into a little jar like this, take a fork, and separate our egg yolk from white this way. Just like this, kind of use that fork as a grate or a colander. Then I have my yolk over here, and my white over here. Or, you can have an egg separator, but I'll tell you right now, as you guys know, cooking is my passion. I have a very well utensil-stocked kitchen. I still haven't bought an egg separator because my mom taught me to do it this way when I was little. I've never needed to do it another way. So therefore, I've just continued on. So I'm going to crack my egg here. Carefully, I'm going to take my egg in half, flip it upwards so I'm keeping that yolk in the egg. Part of my white will go out. Then I'm just going to sort of transfer the egg yolk over to the other half of the shell. Let some of that white out again. And again, the yolk to the other half of the shell, letting the white out again. And a couple more times until I've completely separated my white from my yolk, just like this. And as you can see now, same thing, I have my yolk here and my white here. So either way is fine, whether you want to do it in a container like this or the old-fashioned way that goes a little bit quicker once you know what you're doing and you need to do 5 or 6 of these like this. Super up to you. What we will need to do though is keep this egg white for later. So I'm going to set it to the side now and just put my 1 extra yolk into the cream along with the whole egg. I'm going to whisk this in to my cream. Create a custard-like mixture here, which is all custard really is egg yolk and cream. You do have a little white. I'm just using a fork to whisk this in. You could use a whisk, up to you. Set these to the side, and then this egg, cream, and this butter are going to go in the freezer until I need them. All right, while that butter and custard mixture is in the freezer, we're going to talk about the food processor. So this is a food processor. It's a little bit different than a blender, but basically safety-wise, we're going to treat it very similar to a blender. You'll see here on the back of ours are Ninja brand, which is the exact same one I have at my house actually. We're very lucky to have these. I think that for your $1, this is the best product on the market for a household food processor at this time, unless you're going to spend like $500-600. These run about $100. Sometimes you can find them at Costco. If you're baking a lot, especially scones, pie crusts, biscuits, those sorts of things, just like we talked about with the flaky crust, this, invaluable. All right, so cord on ours go around the back here. That's just a good housekeeping measure here when we're putting them away. Similar to a blender, we have buttons up here. The difference on our food processors, you'll see the power button, and then you'll see chop, puree, dough, and disc right here. That does depend on which blade you have in, which we'll talk about later. Today we're going to use the dough button, and if more come up, we'll talk about them. Disc is a whole separate blade than we have in the food processors right now. Then we have low, high, and pulse. We'll be using pulse, which just means you press it as you need it. It doesn't run. Then this lid, well, first we have, this is called our base, and then this is our blender or our food processor. This screws on, this is the lid. There's 2 parts to the lid. This comes off so you can add ingredients as you go. Different from our our KitchenAid mixers, we can add ingredients as we go into the food processor, as long as we're not putting our fingers in here at all. You're just simply dropping in, never going past this rim with your finger while your food processor is on. Never sticking any utensil in here either while the food processor is on. This needs to lock in place here. We'll talk about that in a second. Inside of our food processor, we have what looks like a blender blade. You'll see it has a star that lines up like that. Then we need to lock, awkward to do it backwards, this into place. You'll see a little lock symbol right here. You'll hear it click into place. And then same thing, this little lock matches up with the handle here. You need to get all of it in and lock into place. When you lock this into place, you cannot open it until you press the button here on the handle to unlock it. Your food processor will not blend or turn on unless you have everything perfectly locked into place. If you don't have it locked into place, it will not turn on. That's a huge question I get. Like, why isn't my food processor working? Because you don't have all the locks in place. Then this comes on and off. We always start with it on unless we know that we need it. So we're going to use it just like a blender. We're not going to touch it. We're not going to put our fingers in here. We're not going to take our spatula or whatever we're using and stick it down in here. The only time you use this while it is on would be simply to take a little bit of the ingredients and drop it in there like that. My finger's never going in. Okay? All right. So we are going to use this right now. The nice thing about ours also is that they suction cup onto the counter, which makes it a little bit tricky, but is actually really nice because they don't go all over the place while you're using it for the most part. I'm going to take this off. I'm going to place my dry ingredients. Our recipe says prep the dry ingredients in the bowl of a food processor. Combine the flour. We have our flour here. We're just going to dump it all in. You do need to make sure that blade is in place before you dump in any ingredients, because if not, you have to take them all back out and then put that blade in and put them in. It's a real pain. Whoop. There goes my microphone. I'm sure that sounds lovely. A little technical difficulty. Sorry about that, guys. So I just put in my flour. I'm going to then put in my sugar. Baking powder. Salt. This is a kosher salt. It does matter, but at home, if you're just trying to make some scones, regular table salt will work just fine. And then some of my chai spice here. This is a chai spice blend that I made personally, but you can buy it from like a spice market. Sometimes you can find them at Fred Meyer's or Safeway, but that might be something you kind of have to specialty look for. All right, I'm going to lock this into place, put my top on, plug it in, and then it just says pulse a handful of times quickly to bring the mixture together. So you're turning it on and pulsing. All right, that should be good. The nice thing about this recipe is that you can tell if the mixture is truly mixed together or not, because the chai spices stand out and all of the rest of the white powders. All right, then we're going to add our wet ingredients. So I need to go pull those out of the freezer. All right, so I just let this freeze. You can tell it is frosted here. I took my fork and I just sort of mixed my custard-like mixture together. My butter is nice and frozen here. It's been about 20 minutes since we've done this. Our next step is add the wet ingredients. So pull the butter out of the freezer, add it to the flour mixture, pulse it into the flour until the butter begins to cut into the flour mixture about 25 to 30 pulses. Some pieces of butter will be small, some are large. Both are good. We need a nice variety so we have a nice texture flavor there. It gets nice. That's how we get our flakiness. And then we'll move on from there. Let's try this first. So we're going to place all of this butter in here. I'm going to lock my food processor into place, turn it on, and pulse 25 to 30 times, watching my flour butter mixture as I go. 24, and 25. All right, at 25, I'm going to take a look. I do see some bigger pieces. Careful not to put your fingers in here because there are blades, and some small pieces. So it's exactly where we want it at 25 pulses right now. Perfect. So I'm going to read on in my recipe. The next says, pull the cream and the egg mixture out of the freezer. Slowly and gradually is the key here. Pulse into the butter and flour mixture until the dough forms a ball and starts to pull away from the food processor as its own unit of dough from the sides. The dough will be slightly wet to the touch with pieces of butter still visible. You may not need to use all the cream mixture, and that's okay. So we're going to plan on not using all of this and be totally fine with that. In fact, we have extra likely for just in case. So what this looks like, I'm going to take off my top. And again, I'm not sticking anything in here other than the mixture, okay? So I'm going to put this on dough mode. Add a little in. And I'm just slowly dripping this in. I'm going to stop it, add a little bit more. Let it stop, add a little more. And as you can see, it's starting to become its own thing. I would say it needs a little bit more wetness right now. It's a little on the dry side to touch. I'm going to lock this back in place. I just have a little bit more. So I'm going to use all of my mixture in here. That does not necessarily mean you are going to use yours. Maybe the flour was a little bit packed because we measured it by volume, not by weight with our measurement, which is totally fine. We'll get into that later. But for now, just know that yours could look a little different. So just because I'm using all of mine does not mean that you need to use all of yours. All right, careful not to over pulse. Give it one last go. Set this to the side. And then I'm going to be very careful pulling this blade out because it is extremely sharp, you guys. Like, these blades are sharp, sharp. When I'm talking sharp, these are brand new food processors, just bought last year. So I'm not going to touch it. I'm just going to use like a rubber scraper, scrape it off. Be okay leaving some on there. It'll come off when you wash it. Set it to the side in a safe place. So for now, I'm going to set mine into this jar because I know it can't roll away and cut somebody's foot by falling off of a counter. Going to set all of my things to the side so that I can set up my plastic wrap here. So I'm going to take regular plastic wrap. This is a Costco brand because we love Costco in this classroom. Going to pull out a good length. Cut it off here. Try to keep it nice and open. Back to the side. Open it up here. Then I'm going to try to take, touching my dough as little as possible with my hands because my hands are hot and they will melt that butter. It's going to start to pull this together. You can even go like this. Sort of set it out on your plastic wrap here and form it in to a ball. I'm going to put the rest here now. Take my plastic and form it into a nice big dough ball. Again, touching it as little as possible. I know I keep saying that, but that's everyone's number one mistake when they're making something flaky like a scone, a biscuit, or a pie crust. So from here, I'm going to take another piece of plastic wrap. It's getting a little messy, but that's okay. A messy cook's a good cook. We try to keep it professional and clean at all times, but sometimes right in the midst of a step, it can get messy, and that's okay. Put more plastic wrap out. If you've noticed, I've cleaned up my counter between each step. So while it is okay to be messy in something like this, it's not okay to be dirty and keep it messy the whole time. Going to transfer. I'm at the end of my day, guys, sorry. Into a second layer of plastic wrap so I can form this into a dough ball, just like this. My dough needs to rest now in the freezer for 30 minutes before I can move on to my next step. So I'm just going to take this, because you're in a classroom full of others, I'm going to take the class Sharpie and write kitchen 1 period 0. Just like that, and place it into the freezer. All right, just a real quick tip here. This is what's called a bench scraper. Maybe you've used one before, maybe you haven't. I don't know, I wasn't your culinary 1 teacher. I'm going to use it here, scrape up. It's taking my cutting board or anything really flat. You could even just scrape it straight into a garbage can. I have all of this crumb here. It's a real quick, easy way to clean off my countertop when I'm baking with dough. And that's it. I'm just going to take this to the trash, wipe down my surface, and I save myself from trying to do this and smush it into the counter more. All right, while our dough is resting, I'm just going to go ahead and make the glaze so it's ready ahead of time. I have a heaping cup. Remember, a heaping cup is when you fill your measuring cup and there is a pile over, you do not level it off for a heaping cup. You leave that mountain on top of your measuring cup. Heaping cup of powdered sugar. Then I have 2 teaspoons of our chai spice blend here. Just like that. Nice and spicy. Then I'm going to whisk in a teaspoon of the vanilla extract. Right here. It's going to sort of melt my powdered sugar, much like our icing on our pumpkin muffins that we did. Then I have a pinch of kosher salt. I kind of rub that around. I didn't get quite a pinch there. A tablespoon of maple syrup. Got the good stuff from Costco, real maple syrup. Mix it around a little bit. Try to get it mixed in. Should have used a bigger bowl. And then 3 tablespoons of heavy cream. Just whisking this all together. I'll add a little more. Looks like this is a nice thick glaze. Just like this. Make sure all of those lumps of powdered sugar are out of our glaze, so I'm going to give it a good whisk. It's looking something like this. It is a maple chai glaze. Perfect. And then we'll dunk our finished scone product into this later on. But now I have it ready to go, so I'm just waiting anyway. All right, well, we have a little bit of time while our dough's just in the freezer chilling. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about some life skill things that I like to teach you along the way too. If you've noticed, a lot of the ingredients I've been pulling out for my mise en place, my pre-set out ingredients, are in these little ramekin dishes. These are just a couple bucks, not a big deal. However, back when I was in college getting my first place, 19, 20 years old, I didn't have a couple bucks. I barely had a couple bucks to buy groceries. And so I was not out here buying little tiny dishes just for my kitchen pleasure. I was happy to have my 1 bowl with my 2 forks, just the bare minimum, right? I bet a lot of you guys are going to be there in just the next couple of years, so I just wanted to give you a little tip. If you've noticed, I've also used some of these jars for measuring. This one's a little dirty because I just had oil in it, but they're just clear jars. They're actually just wee yogurt jars. You can buy these at Walmart. I think it's like $1.25 a yogurt right now. I just eat the yogurt and then I peel off the label. It's pretty easy most of the time. Now it's going to prove me a liar. They just come off just like that. You might have a little residue. You can put some oil or some mayonnaise on here. Rub it around with the rough side of your sponge. Scrape it off. Then just wash it like normal. And you have a nice, there's always something. Right now it's a dog outside. You have a nice little jar. You can even pop on Amazon and Google or search, not Google, on Amazon, Oui yogurt lids, OUI, you'll see on the jar. They have some really, really cute lids, some little plastic ones with daisies, some kind of wooden cork looking containers. I use these all the time to like pack our lunches with little blueberries, little sauces. If you need like a side of ranch or something in there to dip your food into, this is great. I've even seen them being used as like little paint jars, putting the cork lid on them and using them on your desk to put like push pins and paper clips and things in. These things, I've seen them being reused as hand poured candles. I could go on and on. Little mini pots for your starter plants. There's like a crazy amount of crafts you can do with them that I see all over the internet. So again, not to over explain it, but just to tell you that these little simple jars have 1,000 uses. Highly recommend getting them for your kitchen because then you get food in a little jar. All right, I just pulled my dough out of the plastic wrap straight from the freezer. It is pretty frozen. I'm going to take and lightly flour my surface here. Just going to take my pre-set out flour and sprinkle it all around. We don't want big clumps, but we just want a nice kind of light surface sprinkled around here. I'm going to take my dough, rub my hands with flour, and because it's pretty flaked off still, that means like we have a big amount of crumbs. I'm going to work it all together. We do want to be careful not to overwork our dough so that butter doesn't get melted, the entire reason we put it in the freezer, but we need to make sure it's one cohesive unit. So it's going to keep working until it is, which it's a pretty thick dough, so you might hear that it's a little tough, right? It's a little hard to talk and turn it, and that's totally fine. It's just part of it. Right, I'm going to try to make a circle about 1 inch thick, and as circular as I can get it. This is our French rolling pin. You might have heard me talk about it. It's my preferred rolling pin. We'll talk about why in the biscuit video. But you just use your palm, the heel of your hand like this. You take before, and I lightly rolled it with a little bit of flour, and I'm here rolling it out into a circle, again about 1 inch thick. I'm going to take my edges here, sort of scoop them up, make sure I have one good piece of dough to pull up together like this. Sorry, I forgot I was on video for a second. I hum when I bake sometimes. Alright, I'm going to set this to the side and then just reflour the surface. So when I cut these into little scones, they aren't sticking and peeling off of this surface here. So I'm going to take my bench scraper, cut down. I'm going to cut these into wedges. So I'm cutting here and then in half again. You could also just use a regular knife if you don't have a bench scraper at home. But since we do, we are going to go ahead and use these guys because they're pretty easy. We're here and here. So I just cut this circle into little wedges. These are pretty big. If you wanted smaller scones, guess what? You just can make them into smaller scones. You could have done a rectangle and gone a totally different way. There's special scone pans that are nice if you're making scones all the time, but totally not necessary if you're just doing every once in a while. I'm going to place these on my baking sheet and bake them off. I am doing like one scone this way, one scone that way on my baking sheet, not the same way, so that they're evenly spaced out. just like this, and then I'll just pop them, oops, I have to do my egg wash first, that's right, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I have my egg white that I reserved earlier, just plain old white of an egg. I have my pastry brush. It's going to take, oops, nice. I'll have to transfer these onto a new baking sheet now. If not, this egg is going to cook right on there. But for the rest of it, I'm just going to take, wash, this is called washing your scone with an egg white. It just means taking your brush and kind of brushing, painting over that scone with that egg white. It helps it have a nice moist crust and have a little glossy look as well. Just here. Want to make sure we get all of them. I'm just using the stuff that I just spilled out onto that tray. And then I'm going to head. It's okay to be generous with this, but what you don't want is too many clumps of egg white, because then you're just going to get cooked egg on top of your scone here, which is not what we're going for with our chai scones. I don't think that'd be very delicious. This will definitely be a 2-day lab, so you will have stopped at the part where we put our dough in the freezer, and this is day 2. Alright, so I just washed my egg whites. I'm going to place these in the oven now. Alright, I just took my scones out of the oven here. Here are 3 I just pulled off the tray after they've cooled for a little bit. I have my maple chai glaze here. It's going to take, it's real easy. You could drizzle, but the easiest thing to do with a glaze is just dip. Oops. Just like that. Into, again, just dip. This glaze should harden in about 10 minutes, and you'll get a nice kind of crusted sugar on here. You can double dip at that point if you would like. To me, I don't like an overly sweet scone. I like to have these with my coffee, and in the morning that's just too much for me. So I'm going to stick to 1 glaze. But again, if it's set and you wanted to double dip and get that nice thick glaze, that is a way to do it. It's that easy. All right, guys, have a good day.